Hello everybody and welcome to my third vlog about my small collection of Leica cameras, and this one I'd like to compare the 3C which we have here with the earlier 3B which I featured in the last upload. The 3C, which we're going to concentrate on here, was produced between about 1940 and 1950, and of course those were very dark days for Europe. And the interesting part about this is that the 3C came in a number of quite interesting varieties. We will come on to that a little bit later. What I'd like to do now is just to compare both of the cameras and point out a few of the detail differences. In fact, there are a lot of detail differences between the 3B and the 3C. The 3B is actually a little bit smaller. I don't know whether this is going to show up here, but the 3C, which is on the right, is a little bit bigger. Looking at the two from where I am, there is a sort of a noticeable difference, but the difference in height and the difference in width is really only in millimeters, but you can see there's definitely a difference there, and the two cameras are the 3C is slightly wider. There is definitely a difference in dimension between the two cameras. And probably the reason for this is that the 3C was quite different in its construction. It had a one-piece die-cast chassis. Whether this was to improve rigidity, or whether it was actually a less expensive way of producing the cameras, or both, I don't know. But the 3B here is more conventional. In fact, it's what some people would call the last of the true Barnacks, and the 3C here is really quite a different design, and you can see that if you start to compare details. The 3B has 3 screws along here. The 3C has the 2, and the top plate on the 3C extends right down here. On the 3B it doesn't. There's also detail differences around the viewfinder window here at the front, and also on the 3C, if I just tilt it there, the rewind knob and the diopter setting are mounted on this small platform, whereas on the 3B there is no platform, it's flat on the top. Another point is that the slow speed on the 3B, the slow speed dial has a screw there. The 3C doesn't, and if we turn them around like so, again we have 3 screws on the 3B, and we have 2 on the 3C. The collars around the shutter buttons are slightly different as well, and one of the most noticeable things as well is the frame counter. I'm just going to cock the shutter on that one, and the arrow for zeroing the frame counter is here. And when we press the shutter on the 3B and we wind on, I don't know whether you'll be able to see this, but the base plate as well as the actual knurled knob, they move together, whereas if I do the same thing with the 3C, if I fire the shutter like so, then I wind on, only the knob moves and the lower part here moves independently. The other details are not dissimilar really. Those are the main features. The biggest difference is actually the size of the body, which is actually quite noticeable when you put the two cameras together. Another point is that incidentally this 3C, the vulcanite's finished in what's known as shark skin, and I don't know how many of these were finished in that. I don't know whether all of them were finished in that, but it's actually different to the vulcanite on the 3C. It is obviously it's vulcanite, but it's just a different finish, and it was always referred to as shark skin. Don't think that makes the camera any different. I'm pretty certain I've seen other 3Cs with exactly the same finish on it. The other interesting difference is if we remove the base plate, there's the 3B. I'll remove the base plate from the 3C. And if we compare the lower part of the cameras, you'll notice that the 3B has the mechanism not exposed exactly, but there's no plate that covers the this mechanism here, whereas the 3C has a plate that screws on across there. And because it has this plate here, the important instructions about cutting the leader are now on this plate here and not on the base plate, whereas with the 3B, like the 3A we looked at, the instructions are on the base plate. So I'll just put these back on. The 10 years of production with the 3C led to a number of little variations, some variations being bigger than others. Incidentally, this one has got the f2 Summit R, which is one of my favourite lenses. The fact that these were produced during the war led to a number of different finishes. Now, this one is a post-war one. I did have a wartime one. All I've got now though is a photograph of it, so I'll just move the 3B out of the way in the hope that this picture here can explain a few differences. I know it's not the ideal way of doing this, but this one, which I owned in the 70s, was a 1942 3C. Now, I, in the 70s, knew very little about these cameras. You have to remember that the 70s were light years before the internet. And so, whereas we can glean information almost instantaneously now, that back then it was not like that at all. I didn't put any particular importance on the very important fact that this camera has a K after the serial number. This means that it's German for, and I hope I pronounce this properly, it's German for Kugellager, which means ball bearing. And this is one of a number of cameras that were fitted with ball bearings that allowed them to be used in the colder conditions. I mean, obviously, Russia comes to mind. This was a wartime camera, also fitted with a scimitar. And you'll also notice that the rewind lever here, it isn't very clear on the photograph, but this is raised slightly. And these bodies were known as steppers because the rewind, the little lever that disengages the wind-on mechanism so you can rewind the film, it's mounted on a small platform which forms a step, so that's where the name stepper comes from. Not all steppers have the K behind the at the end of the serial number, and these cameras, I think it's safe to say that all the stepper Leica bodies on the 3C are more collectible. But these are particularly collectible because they have this K here. And there was one for sale. A dealer, Peter Loy, had one. And he was selling it, it's sold now, but he was selling it for just under £1,000. That's £1,000 in British money. So there's quite an additional value to these. And the one he had, he mentioned it was finished in silver, as indeed is this one. And he quoted a book saying that there are only about 50. Now, I don't know how true this is. I'm just quoting another quote. There are only about 50 made in the standard silver colour. I remember this camera was, it had seen quite a lot of use, but you know, I do regret selling it. I mean, when I did sell it about 10 years after first buying it, as far as I was concerned, it was just another Leica. And in fact, I didn't put any particular importance on that K. And it wasn't until I was looking at the photograph, this photograph, which I took with a Pentax Spotmatic 2 incidentally, that I realised that I'd once owned one of these. But back in the 70s, you know, it was no different to any other camera, any other Leica. As far as I was concerned, I didn't have any. The K didn't have any specific significance for me at the time. And in fact, back in the 70s, it may not have done for anybody else either. Things become collectible many years later. And if you don't mind, I'll just have a quick slurp of coffee. So anyway, to my eternal regret, I sold this one. And this was the first of the Leicas I started collecting because I wanted another 3C. This one's a post-war one, 1950. And when I bought it, which was an eBay purchase, I didn't know a massive amount. I knew far less then than I do now about these cameras, and but once you've had a Leica, it's quite nice to have one, and another one. And I just decided out of the blue I would quite like to get another 3C. When it arrived, I was quite amazed at how good it was, because I got the mental image of the pre-war one I had, sorry, the wartime one I had, where this silver was quite dull. It had had a lot of, it had seen a lot of use, but it did work. Got a few little problems. I think there was a pinhole in the shutter blind. Also, going back to the wartime ones, there were lots and lots of variations. There were different, a lot of them were finished in grey because of material shortages. And also, some of them actually had red shutter blinds. Some actually had a K imprinted on the blinds. The one I had didn't. It had black blinds, but they, from memory, they weren't the blinds that we see in these. It was a different sort of material, more of a rubbery material, but it was black. It wasn't red, and it didn't have any Ks on. But I think it had a little pinhole in the first blind. because it used to, if I left the camera cocked and I didn't put the lens cap on, there was a sort of an odd white shadow that used to appear on one side of the frame. But if the shutter wasn't cocked or the lens cap was put on it, that didn't happen. So it clearly needed a little bit of attention. But as I've said, if I knew then what I know now. The finishes on the wartime ones, I said, were grey. This one, the one I had, was silver. I'll just put it there at the back. No, it doesn't look right, does it? I'll sort of I'll put it in front again. And you can see it's the standard silver finish, but it wasn't as bright as the post-war ones. I say this one arrived from eBay. It was quite clear that the shutter was hanging. It was not working properly. Always be a bit aware when people say they know nothing about cameras, because they may not know anything about cameras, but on the other hand, they may well be pretending they know nothing about cameras and they know there's a fault. But I did contact him actually and say this camera's not working properly, and he did return a little bit of money. But that wasn't the end of the story, because the lens, the Scimitar lens that came with it, isn't this one. I've replaced it because the other one had quite rusty aperture blades. But that's another story. I may return to that later. The point is that this is a post-war 1951 with a very nice Scimitar lens that I purchased from Red Dot. Annoyingly, the problematic lens, cosmetically, was probably better than this one, but it had got corrosion of the iris blades, which suggests to me that the camera and the lens may not have had that much use, but had been badly stored somewhere. But we'll never know. Anyway, the point is that it's now got a very nice, fully working Scimitar in good condition. And Red Dot also serviced the camera, so it's come back now in fully working order. I hope this is focusing properly. But, the light, I'm afraid, isn't brilliant either, and I do apologise for that. So what else about it? Well, once I got everything sorted, once I got replacement lens and had it serviced, it's a very nice and fully working camera. But going back to the wartime ones, this K for the ball bearing, denoting a ball bearing type shutter, it's different, as I understand it, to the post-war ones. The post-war Leica 3Cs also had a ball bearing shutter, but as I understand it, they were not the same type as the 3CKs. If you go on these various different Leica forums, you can pick up all sorts of information, but sometimes the information can vary from one source to another, and so it's difficult to decide what is correct and what isn't. And so what I'm going to say now is just what I have read. Whether it's right or whether it's wrong, I don't know. But I think the general consensus of opinion is that there are some Ks, but these tend to be referred to as 3CKs, not these, the one on the photograph, but the 3CK tended to be considered to be the one with the ball bearing shutters, the ball bearing shutter type, which had a different type of ball bearing shutter to the post-war 3C. Sorry about that, that's not very clear. In other words, all 3Cs after the K series had a ball bearing shutter, but it wasn't the same shutter design as the ones fitted to the K. Wasn't the same ball bearing design as the ones fitted to the those that are marked with the K. So it's a bit difficult to for me to say that absolutely categorically. It's just what I've read. Also, some people claim that there are some cameras which do have the same specification as the 3CK, but aren't marked with a K. And these are, it's only discovered when these cameras are stripped down for servicing that they are actually a K as well. So there's a lot of sort of weird variations going on at that point. But of course, there was a war going on. I don't know of any other variations on the CKs. All I do know is that as much as I like this one, this is a standard 1950 post-war one, I wish I'd never sold that other one. But we learn by our mistakes, don't we? And so there you go. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this comparison with the 3B, and also I hope I haven't confused things by mentioning the other one I had as well. I mean, this is the only photograph I took of it, and it is to my eternal regret that I sold it about 10 years after I'd bought it, because that camera, also on the back of it, here, there were some other marks as well. From memory, a friend of mine remembers this as well, just there on this one, there were a couple of SS type lightning flashes which had been sort of amateurishly either scratched or engraved, and I can't remember now. Now I always thought that was some sort of I don't know, sick joke that the previous owner had put on, or the previous owner to that, but somebody in the past had done that. But I've since seen and read a few articles about this, and these were often done by, according to another website, these markings were often, and they weren't official markings, you know, they were either scratched or amateurishly engraved onto the back of the camera, around about here somewhere. But certainly this had some odd markings there, and I've seen the photograph of another one which had amateurishly marked engravings on the back with a number on. So I wonder if this one may have been owned by some officer or other, and maybe, you know, maybe this one had some, if he could have talked, may have had some interesting tales to tell. I would like to think it still exists. Its serial number is, I'm reading this upside down, it's 387176. But if I turned it round the other way, there's its serial number. And I would, as I said, like to think that the camera is still in existence somewhere. Who knows? Anyway, thank you very much for your interest. If you've got any questions or any comments you'd like to make, please make them. and I'll see if I can answer them, or if you've got any comments at all, any additional information, then I'd be most interested to hear that. So again, thanks very much, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. And the next one will be probably in a week or two's time, and that we'll compare this post-war 3C. We'll compare it with the following model, which was the 3F. So thanks again. Bye for now.